in a quiet American suburb, the last weekend of October brought with it an unsettling chill that seemed to hang in the air. Sarah Heller, a 29-year-old teacher known for her warmth and generosity, was planning a weekend getaway to escape the stress of her job. She shared her plans with friends and family, and by all accounts, Sarah was the least likely person anyone would imagine caught up in danger. Sarah's trip was simple. A cabin nestled within forested hills, just a few hours from her home. She'd go alone, savoring the peaceful solitude. However, Sarah never arrived at her destination. Her phone last pinged at a gas station midway, and when police arrived at the cabin 2 days later after her family reported her missing, it was clear she'd never made it there. The search that followed was thorough, combing through miles of woods, nearby lakes, and examining every small detail. But Sarah was gone without a trace. Oddly, the investigation found her car abandoned, just 2 miles from her destination, with the doors locked and her phone inside. Inside the car, police found a post-it note with the chilling phrase, "Now you see me, now you don't." Was it a clue, a taunt, or something else entirely? As days turned into weeks, the case became a nightmare for her family. But something else began to haunt the town. Unexplained sightings and incidents, each one stranger than the last. Hikers reported finding bizarre symbols carved into trees around where her car was found. Late at night, people heard a woman's laughter echoing in the woods, though no one could identify its source. One night, weeks after Sarah's disappearance, a man named Greg Taylor, a local volunteer in the search efforts, began experiencing something inexplicable. He claimed he would often see a figure, a young woman, standing just at the edge of his backyard, her form obscured by shadows. The figure never approached, only watched. After he shared his sightings, others claimed to have seen the same figure. A mysterious discovery came months later when a local hunter found a trail of clothing, Sarah's scarf, her shoes, even her favorite bracelet, scattered at intervals along a hidden path in the forest. But it led to nothing, stopping abruptly. No body, no more clues. The town's police department, already stretched thin, was stumped. Local rumors hinted at everything from cult activity to paranormal occurrences, with townsfolk speculating wildly about what might have happened to Sarah. Yet, one clue that never quite fit into the narrative was Sarah's ex-boyfriend, a man with a history of volatile behavior who had recently been spotted in the area where her car was found. Despite this, he had an airtight alibi. In an eerie twist, nearly a year after her disappearance, Sarah's car was found again, moved several miles from its original location and parked in front of her old house. The doors were locked, the post-it note was gone, but a new clue sat on the dashboard, a single white lily, known to symbolize purity and loss. It was as if someone was playing a game, leaving a breadcrumb trail, but never fully revealing their hand. To this day, no one knows what truly happened to Sarah Heller. The case remains open, unsolved, haunting her family and the quiet town where she lived. Her disappearance became a ghost story, a tragedy that left an entire community grasping at shadows, wondering if they were being taunted by a person or something beyond. In the early days of September, a small town in the Midwest woke to a nightmare so grim that its details seemed more suited to a dark thriller than reality. By morning's light, the residents of Brookshire had no inkling of the events that had unfolded overnight. But as the hours passed, whispers of a gruesome scene and bloody mess trickled through town, transforming the sleepy fog-covered streets into a hub of dread and horror. The first official sign of trouble came from a patrol officer's radio call. Officer David Hill had responded to a call about a suspicious vehicle abandoned along the county road. The car's engine was still warm, and within, faint traces of blood lined the passenger seat. Outside, smeared tracks led down a narrow path into the nearby woods. Following the trail, Officer Hill's flashlight caught sight of a figure. A young woman, her clothes stained and torn, barely clinging to consciousness. She mumbled disjointed words, but through her weakened voice, one sentence emerged clearly. "They're still inside. All of them." It was enough for the officer to realize that something horrific lay waiting. The girl's name was Emily, and she'd been missing for 2 days. It was unclear how she had ended up on the county road, but she seemed to have escaped from somewhere nearby. After paramedics arrived, she was rushed to the hospital for immediate care, while a task force swiftly began combing through the woods, following the same trail that had brought her to that roadside. As the team pressed deeper, they stumbled upon a rundown farmhouse. Its windows were boarded, but the faintest light seeped through cracks. The smell of decay and rusted iron drifted from the property, raising alarms in every officer present. The front door, hanging slightly ajar, revealed a scene of indescribable horror. Inside the farmhouse, the officers encountered something worse than any nightmare. The rooms were littered with bloodstains, crude markings on the walls, and symbols that seemed to be carved by a maniacal hand. In one room, police discovered 3 other young people, 2 women and a man, bound and bruised. Each victim bore signs of torture, their bodies marked with fresh and fading wounds, as if their suffering had spanned days. All were barely alive, their breaths shallow, their voices whispers of pleading terror. But the worst discovery awaited the team in the basement. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly glow over the cement walls. In the center of the room lay evidence that suggested some kind of ritualistic display, a sight so disturbing that several officers were forced to leave the room. Scrawled across the floor in blood were cryptic, chilling symbols that only hinted at a twisted purpose, a purpose that would remain mysterious, as police soon learned. As the survivors were rushed to the hospital, detectives delved into the property's records, finding that the farmhouse had belonged to a man named Martin Dale. Dale was known in Brookshire, though he kept to himself, living a seemingly quiet life on the edge of town. The locals only recalled brief encounters, passing exchanges at the grocery store, and a vague reputation as a reclusive, eccentric figure. But no one suspected the darkness that had been festering within his home. Upon further investigation, authorities discovered that Dale had a history of mental illness, but he had fallen off the radar years ago, without family or friends left in town to check on him. Yet, clues within his home revealed that Dale had spent months, possibly years, obsessed with occult practices and violent rituals, fixated on capturing innocent souls. The markings found on the walls, the strange items scattered throughout the house, and the journals filled with incoherent ramblings painted a picture of a man consumed by a twisted ideology. But Dale himself was nowhere to be found. The search for Martin Dale extended over several states, with the FBI joining the manhunt. For days, speculation ran wild in Brookshire. Some locals believed he'd fled into the dense forests that bordered town, while others swore they'd seen him slipping through alleys at night. Fear took hold as parents kept children indoors, and residents double-locked their doors. In a chilling turn, a resident discovered a blood-streaked note slipped under their door. The note bore an unsettling message: "I will be back to complete what I started." Police took it as a taunt, a brazen declaration that Dale was still lurking, watching, waiting to continue his horrific plans. Several weeks passed with no leads on Dale's whereabouts, and the investigation gradually slowed. Authorities speculated that Dale might have died in the wilderness, or had found a way to slip through the cracks of society, hiding in plain sight among strangers. But Brookshire could never quite shake the feeling of his presence, as if he were a shadow cast over the town, invisible, but always near. Emily and the other survivors slowly recovered in the hospital, though their physical scars were only the surface of their suffering. None of them spoke much about what had happened inside the farmhouse, and when they did, their words were haunted, broken, as if describing a reality too disturbing to fully comprehend. Emily herself remained under psychiatric care, her eyes vacant, her voice distant. It was only years later that the farmhouse was demolished, the land paved over to erase the dark memory, but stories still lingered. Rumors of faint screams heard echoing from the woods on quiet nights, of Dale's spirit forever bound to the blood-stained soil where he'd orchestrated his twisted crimes. And as for Martin Dale, his case remains unsolved, his whereabouts unknown. But Brookshire has never forgotten, and to this day, townsfolk whisper his name with fear. The farmhouse may be gone, the woods may be silent, but a sinister memory endures, chilling all who remember the nightmare that slipped into their town one September night. In the chilly pre-dawn hours of a quiet town nestled deep in the heart of Ohio, silence reigned, broken only by the occasional hum of a passing car. It seemed like an ordinary night, but for 24-year-old Elisa Rivera, an aspiring journalist in search of her first big story, it would be one she'd never forget. Elisa was alone, combing through an endless list of unsolved cases. Small-town mysteries, she believed, were often overlooked gems for a career jumpstart. But something in the files began gnawing at her, unsettling her more with each passing minute. These cases weren't just unusual, they bordered on horrific. And the more she read, the clearer it became. Someone had to expose this. There was a pattern no one had seen, a dark string of disappearances across various states that no one had yet connected. All young, all locals, and all lost between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. digging deeper. Elisa realized a horrifying truth. The cases traced a specific path, a triangle stretching from Ohio through Pennsylvania to rural West Virginia. The missing persons had been marked as cold cases, forgotten in the files of small police stations due to lack of evidence, witnesses, or sometimes even basic DNA collection. Determined to uncover the truth, Elisa contacted her friend Claire, a research assistant at a forensic lab. "Do you know about these cases?" Elisa asked, her voice trembling over the phone. 3 towns: Dixon, Bristol, and Willow Creek. It seems no one's connected them. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "Elisa, I've heard the whispers, but we don't talk about those cases here. There's something wrong with them. Every one of those stations reported strange findings." "What kind of findings?" Elisa demanded. But Claire refused to answer over the phone. "Meet me at the diner off Route 22. Midnight." The diner was dim and nearly empty, and the clock had just ticked over to 12:01 a.m. when Claire slid into the booth across from Elisa. Without any small talk, she handed Elisa a flash drive. "That's everything I've gathered on these cases. But Elisa, once you see this, there's no turning back." Elisa braced herself and inserted the drive into her laptop. Grainy photographs filled the screen, along with fragments of notes from police reports. Unexplained bruising, traces of a rare, toxic herb, objects left behind that didn't belong to the victims. As she scrolled, one photo in particular froze her blood. Each scene, regardless of location, had a hand-carved wooden figure left behind. It was a crude shape, resembling a woman, with outstretched arms as though reaching for help. What is this?" Elisa's voice shook. "We call her the Caller," Claire said. "No one knows who leaves these figures or why, but they always show up at the scene of these disappearances. Some officers think it's the killer's signature. Others think, well, that it's something else." Elisa could hardly believe what she was hearing, yet the evidence was right there, more chilling with each revelation. The idea of a killer leaving behind a token wasn't unusual, but this figure, its hollow eyes, that dreadful shape, seemed almost alive. It wasn't just a mark. It was a message. Fueled by an insatiable curiosity and a growing sense of fear, Elisa packed her car the following evening and set off for the town of Dixon, Ohio, where the first disappearance had occurred. She drove through the night, every nerve on edge, wondering if this story might be her breakthrough or her breaking point. Dixon was desolate when she arrived, blanketed by an eerie fog. She parked her car outside the town library, where she'd arranged to meet Officer Harper, one of the only local cops still interested in the cold case. "Miss Rivera?" Harper called out, his voice barely audible over the early morning breeze. He seemed exhausted, his eyes shadowed and distant. "Yes. Thank you for meeting me." They spoke in hushed tones in the library's empty reading room. Harper explained how the case had started out small, a young girl vanishing on her way home. But then came the next disappearance, then another. And always, he added, the figure of the Caller was left behind, as if watching over each tragedy. "It's not just a figure, though," Harper murmured, eyes darting around. "Rumor is, you hear her before you see her. She calls out in the night, whispering your name, begging for help. Those who go to her, they don't come back." Elisa shivered, but pushed her fear aside. "Who or what is it?" Harper hesitated. "People here, they think it's not a person at all. They believe the Caller is something older than this town, something that's been waiting, drawing people in. Those who vanish, they never really die. They're taken." As they talked, a strange chill settled in the room, and Elisa's skin prickled. Outside, the night grew darker, and the air seemed to thicken with an unnatural stillness. Just as she was about to press Harper for more details, the silence shattered. A faint voice, barely audible, echoed through the library. It was soft, pleading, and unmistakably female. "Help me. Please." Elisa's blood turned to ice. She looked at Harper, who had gone white as a sheet. He mouthed a single word: "Run." They bolted out of the library into the night, the sound following them like a distant echo, relentless and haunting. Elisa could hear her own name faintly, in that pitiful wail. "Elisa!" Heart pounding, she jumped into her car, with Harper following close behind. They sped down the empty streets, the whispers growing louder, filling her head with a fear she could hardly control. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the road. It held something small and wooden in its outstretched hands. Elisa's hands shook on the wheel, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she sped away. They didn't stop until they reached the city limits, where the whispers finally faded and silence returned. Harper, still shaken, whispered, "I told you. It's not just a case. It's a curse." Over the following weeks, Elisa tried to distance herself from that night, but the memory of the Caller haunted her dreams. She knew that she had to share the story, to warn others, yet feared that doing so might draw the Caller closer to her. Eventually, she submitted a draft article detailing the horrors she had uncovered. But, oddly enough, the article never saw the light of day. The file disappeared, and every copy she tried to print turned up blank. Elisa left the town of Dixon soon after, carrying the weight of the unsolved cases with her, and every so often, when the clock struck 3 a.m., she'd wake to the faint sound of someone calling her name, soft, pleading, and desperate. She'd check the window, shiver, and remind herself it was just a bad dream. But the shadow that lingered in her mind told her otherwise. Somewhere out there, the caller was waiting, and maybe, just maybe, it was calling for her.